Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back and thank you for keeping it here on a Biashara Tuesday. As I said earlier, continue speaking to us on social platforms at KUTV Kenya. We just had a discussion here a few minutes ago with Abisola Ajani, who's a resident of the United Kingdom, a chemical engineer, founder of the Black Women Engineering, and also participating in the EOP Engineering Outreach Program at Kenyatta University, a workshop session for women in engineering, and students from Kenyatta University are benefiting from the conversations happening there and how they can participate towards SDG number 2. Picking it up from there, the next guest here is Charles Okech. He's a dedicated advocate and a prolific writer. I hope hata niko sawa kwa any of these words, because writers are very keen with words and pronunciation. So prolific writer whose passion for influencing both international and internal policy is truly inspiring here. You can be taking a look at Siasa Place, siasaplace.com, and let us know if it is relevant to you. But they're championing change and advocating for progress, not only through SDGs on the domestic front, but also having a look at human rights and some of international and internal policies. We're going to look at his work in governance, economics, and livelihood, but also on what the role of citizens can be in this international and internal policies. What is your role in advocacy and holding policymakers into account? So remarkable insights we're going to have here. Let me welcome Charles to the show. How are you?
I'm well.
Right.
Yeah.
Please talk to our viewers, maybe something I haven't mentioned about you, and then we get to delve into this discussion.
Well, I think you are overly and above good.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get into it then. Charles, your advocacy work. Could you share maybe key motivations and why you decided to engage in policy and the kind of field that you're in? I know as an advocate, as a writer, there are many fields in which you could expand your expertise into. Why the ones that you've narrowed into?
Okay, so the basic reason as to why I did decide to narrow down to policy, that is, be it international or public policy, is because of a question of ethics. Sometimes, we look at the current trajectory of things in the country, things outside the country, the global outplay, and you realize that we are in a dilapidated position. And sometimes you understand that it is we as human beings that have caused these situations that we are in. And so by what I seek to do in terms of advocacy is to promote ethics in every angle and sphere of life. And so that goes on beyond personal interests and the rest, but just having a society that's sober and focused on ethics, and ethics either in the business sector, either in governance, either in the academia, but just for advocating for ethics.
Right.
Yeah.
Many of your advocacy efforts are centered around SDGs, which are Sustainable Development Goals. Could you highlight some of the specific SDGs that you're passionate about and the impact they have on both international and public policy?
Okay, so number one is that I want to begin with SDG number 4, which is basically education. And so under SDG number 4, it speaks of quality education. And I just don't want to narrow it down to education which you receive in schools or receive in institutions, but education which you can receive from the street, education which you can receive from the media. And so what I'm trying to champion is a sense of awareness in terms of policy issues. That is number one. That's why education comes the first. So through education, you engage with the masses in awareness programs, in awareness campaigns. Like for example, just recently I did a random study just trying to realize, just trying to understand how many people understand the controversial finance bill that was being talked about. So, and I realized that although so many Kenyans will complain about it, they really don't get the intricacies about the issues that involve the society.
I'm going to ask maybe something outside of what we are going to discuss here. When you speak the lack of understanding or the lack of awareness or education of the common citizen when it comes to these matters. Could maybe that be the reason why public participation is overlooked? When it comes to the finance bill of 2023, we saw that close to 90% of Kenyans rejected the bill. But it is true, and actually very true, that many of these Kenyans do not understand the details of the Finance Act of 2023. Could this be why the public participation is overlooked?
Yes, it is very true, because the system itself will usually want to take advantage of the status quo. And so those that control the system will want to take advantage of every weakness which they find around the people, the society itself. And so I really do believe that it really did play and have an impact in terms of overlooking the interests of the people. And it's not just in the finance bill, but in many policies that are being drafted in the global space, in the public space. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of the citizens, let's just maintain there. What role then do the citizens play as we hope that more education is accorded to them? What role do they play there in holding policymakers into account?
Okay. So number one is that allow me to say that recently, I think it was on Friday, when we marked the International Day of Democracy, with a number of organizations at the National Museum. And I think one question which people are asking, how can we start recalling back our elected officials? How can we bring them back? Because if they're not working, how can we call them back? And also allow me to state that at this moment that, one thing that came out of that conversation was that although the Constitution says that we can, it not really specifically talk of how we can do it. So there is a lacuna in the Constitution as it stands, the Katiba 2010, which I think is something for us as a country to look into, and a very good reason as to why I think a cause for a referendum, even in the near future, will be good for the country. But apart from that, how can the citizens now, they themselves, hold their leaders to account? Number one is that we must be able to appreciate the use of social media. Number one, social media has become just an important tool these days, in which we can call out rogue leaders and elected officials. I mean, you remember the story of the leader, the MP from KUTV, who went and slapped a Kenya Power man just because he disconnected power, and he had the power through rogue means. And so using social media and calling out rogue leaders is just one of the way which also believe. Number two is that then Kenyans can also be part of drafting policy. So that is, you make policy proposals to your local county assemblies, the parliament itself, the Senate. Yes, and so that is just it.
Right.
Yeah.
What led us to down this conversation is SDG number 4, which you mentioned as one of those SDGs which you're very keen on in advocacy, and it says quality education. Are there any other SDGs that we can take a look at which you are passionate about in advocacy?
Yes, there is peace, justice, and institutions, which I believe it's something which we really need to be sensitive about, and especially creating strong institutions, because at the moment, what I perceive is a moment in which we have failed trust between institutions and the people. So it's institutions versus the people. And allow me to say that at this point, that coming to my point of ethics, I'll categorize honesty into two terms. We have factual honesty, then we have emotional honesty. So recently, with the outplay which we had with the fuel increase and the backlash from the different leaders in the state, you realize that we are caught in between, that honesty in this country is in trial. So we are caught up in between factual honesty and emotional honesty, where the fact is that when things are wrong, some people will not want to agree with it. But emotionally, they know it is wrong. And so they are hiding from us that which is the truth. And so that just becomes the bedrock under which we as a people now need to be sensitive about. How can we strengthen the institutions, our institutions as a people? Yeah.
Right. Achieving these SDGs while we are still on politics involves navigating very complex political landscapes, right? Is there a way or strategies or approaches that you've seen or that you find effective in advocating for these SDGs in a context where politics could be a challenge and is a challenge if the reality of Kenya is something to go by?
Politics is a challenge because, number one, I am not that much of a political diehard, but politics does become a challenge barely because of the erosion of truth. I mean, you know, when you get into politics, the culture which we have as a country is a culture which deprives people sobriety in terms of the political culture, and so it's a culture that is bloody. You know, competition which is brutal, vicious, and so that itself does serve a challenge when you want to achieve SDGs.
So is it possible to achieve these SDGs, or you have to just play the game as it is?
That's quite an interesting question. Personally, I will suggest that if you can play from the outside, play from the outside. Keep it hygienic. Because the question is whether what you're doing is hygienic, whether what you're doing is in course with the true cause of humanity.
All right. As a writer now at Siasa Place, you delve into governance, economics, and livelihood, and human rights, by the way. How do these topics intersect with your advocacy goals, especially in the context of influencing policymaking, as we are discussing here?
Yes. So that in its own nature is advocacy itself.
Okay.
Because through writing, you're able to share your own opinions and share your own ideas on what areas you think that can work to serve the society right. And so, as you've rightly said, there is a nexus between my advocacy work and the writing which I do at Siasa Place. And so that is just the way in which I will describe it. Yeah.
Okay, that's how the intersection works there.
Yeah.
The landscape of policy advocacy also keeps evolving. How does one stay informed? You are actively in that field, but as we said there, we want every single Kenyan to also play a role in driving meaningful discussions towards policy change. How do I keep myself informed? How do you keep yourself informed in the constantly evolving landscape?
Well, you see, and it's good you're talking about being informed. And you're talking about being informed at a time when information is under depression. Information is being mutilated, where we don't get the right information. And this is why sometimes, you know, allow me just to say this, in the international space, you know, when we talk about having information, the different, you know, media stations you will not want to listen to because of biasness, because of they're just unfair generation of news. And so this way, I believe now, you know, the media industry should be able to stand out as independent, because they are one of the people's watchmen. And if they are corrupted either by, you know, political influence, you know, economic and anything, then it does not serve the cause of having a sober society.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically how we can you can acquire information is that our advice is that don't take everything as it is. Engage in a filtration as you receive information. And so as you get information, filter what's good, filter what's bad, and use the good to multiply the good. Isn't
it? It's actually very it's very ironic that in a generation where information is at a surplus, we are not aware of the right information. We have all these resources, we have the internet, as you said, social media, but we're unable to even follow up or verify by ourselves. And I think that's a good call, even relating it to the SDG number 4, education, quality education, even on a very on a self level, ensuring that you yourself are receiving quality information is also a way towards fundamentally just getting all the right information in policy advocacy and what kind of changes are happening there. Well, we're talking about policy and advocacy. President William Ruto is currently on, or has been on, a global tour. He's this day, he's in the West, the other day is in the East, the other day is in the North, trying to endear himself to allies here and there. What is this, maybe just from a blanket statement, general outlook, what do you take of the president's tours?
Recently I saw something when they said, I think it was running on Citizen TV when they were having their shows on the 10 years of, not 10 years, but rather it's been 1 year since he's been in office.
Yes.
And I think the title was Ruto the Campaigner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in this foreign policy front, I want to say that he is a campaigner. Mm-hmm. He has been outgoing. To some extent, I want to believe it will want to play to his future political ambitions in the country. Yeah, so in terms of winning trust from the outside world, which might help him muscle the might to sustain power. Mm-hmm. But then also, despite of that, I also must be thankful about his Pan-African spirit. I think we've come to see his Pan-African spirit, especially through the Africa Climate Summit. Mm-hmm. And his sobriety when it comes to championing, climate reforms in the continent, mm-hmm. and the African continent having a fair share, just as the rest of the world has. Mm-hmm. And so the global South and the global North all have to be in the same pace when it comes to climate change. Mm-hmm. But then also allow me to say that I also believe that there is also something which I think the administration has gotten amiss when it comes to foreign policy. Mm-hmm. This is when we had functions which were in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs reduced and taken to different ministers, different cabinet secretaries, mm-hmm. and so it has kind of weakened the direction of a foreign policy outlook. Mm-hmm. Despite him being a champion, it seems that he is a champion, but then also there are some mistakes which stand out, such mm-hmm. as that, mm-hmm. the calling of the different functions which the Minister of Foreign Affairs used to play, mm-hmm. and now roles being devolved to
mm-hmm. other state departments.
Yeah, other state departments.
All right. Mm-hmm. Now, when you take a look at this as a normal Kenyan, President William Ruto, a darling of the international community, does it reflect on the internal policy changes, or how can it reflect on how we are doing our internal advocacy in terms of policy making?
Does it reflect at the moment? Mm-hmm. At the moment, I wouldn't say it's that much clear, mm-hmm. but I want to believe that it will unfold in the near future. Mm-hmm. And of course, the international space, the international system does have a share in terms of what happens in the country itself.
Yeah,
it
does.
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah, it does really have a lot, Mm-hmm. And so to some extent, I would say yes, but I wouldn't say it's just that much clear at the mm-hmm. moment. But in my prediction, mm-hmm. I believe it will play out. Right. It will play out because number one, I think we were talking about. Let me just get back on the climate summit. Mm-hmm. We had an issue where some people. I think it was civil society and the NGOs. They mm-hmm. were protesting that they had not been included to the program.
Yes.
And so this is why you say that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Mm-hmm. And so the piper has been paid by the West. And so the tune in the country has to be played from the West. And so that is why, even if, like recently I was looking at this issue, which is quite controversial on climate. If you read the Amnesty report, the Amnesty East Africa did release a report that was last week when they talked about the climate justice issue in DRC. When you talk about green transition, but then green transition at the expense of human rights.
Yes.
Because you're having cobalt being exploited in DRC. People are under dilapidated conditions. People are hurting. People are striving.
Child labor.
Child labor.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you see that come into play, you realize that there's somebody that needs to stand up and speak the truth to power.
When we find ourselves in this kind of situation, Charles, where as you said, whoever has got the piper's pipe and playing that tune is what we, whoever has paid is who the tune is being played towards. When it comes to who financed the Africa Climate Summit, that's information that's out there. You can check it for yourself. When it comes to policies within the Finance Act, which we highlighted earlier, the IMF has a say, right? So there's some things that we need to do if we need a loan, if we need to avoid sanctions here and there. But then there's, that kind of situation we find ourselves in where the West is also fighting, right? We have BRICS on this side, we have the United States on the other, and we are the African country that seeks help on this front. President William Ruto might be a darling of the West, but we've been doing business with China for quite some time, which is in the BRICS actively. Is it bad to have friends? Let's begin with that. Is it really bad to have friends on that kind of international front? And should we sway one way or another? This is just, getting a professional look from your side. Okay.
Maybe I may quote Bibi, the Prime Minister of Israel. I think some time back, Benjamin Netanyahu, in describing his friendship with the U.S., he describes the U.S. as an inalienable friend.
Okay.
Meaning his friendship with the U.S. cannot be reduced to anything. It must turn to the core. The U.S. and Israel are good friends. And so friendship will, in the international front, I must say that it has two aspects. They're friends on values, but then they're also friends on interests.
Okay.
But generally what plays out in terms of friendship is interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what kind of interest do we have, or what interest do they have?
What kind of interest do we have? And this is where I think now the question on how national interest integrates with foreign policy now becomes quite keen for us to understand, because at times, we may have our leaders advancing certain ideas, certain norms, right? But they don't serve the national interest of Kenyans. And so it then serves as a purpose then to also re-examine the question of national interest as a state.
Do we have those? Do we have national interest? Do we have national values? Recently, we've seen a case, in the Supreme Court where the LGBT community has been, allowed to register as an organization. But this is also bringing us at a loggerheads with, are we allowing this? Are these our values? Are these our national interests? Is someone out there, speaking on our behalf? When we find ourselves in that kind of tussle, is there a way out? Is there a clear way out and pointing out to these are our national interests, these are our national values, or should our policies, our international policies, our internal policies also evolve with the rest of the globe?
Of course, I will want to say that globalization in itself, the nature of evolving, is a good thing. But then also, as we are talking about globalization, allow me to quote President Obama. And recently, some time ago, he had an interview and he talked about how globalization is eroding culture. You talk about how certain things which are considered wrong in a certain place, let's say, for example, in Kenya, maybe on the issue on LGBTQ, it is considered wrong because we stand on as a God-fearing country, we stand on the belief that that it is wrong and it should not have its course, and it should not force people to do that which they do not believe in. That is number one. And so globalization is good, but then I think we also, and that's why you talk about information. You need to filter information. For example, right now we have the FCTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, agreement. That's just an example of globalization. The country trying. I know the country is also on pace because we had the FCTA summit. Some
in the AU Media Coordination meeting, I think in June, July.
Some months ago, and so yes, it is also good. But I think what then should stand out is we should have ourselves define our values. Let us not mutilate. Let us not sacrifice our values on the altar of convenience.
Okay. On the international platform, that is as well. So looking ahead, what are your aspirations for advocacy work, and how do you envision yourself shaping this in the society?
Okay, so my aspirations in the advocacy work is as you've said, continued partnership with civil society organizations and NGOs. But then also allow me to say that I also have a network of people from the diplomatic front. It is a young man who just came from school, keen on diplomatic issues, and so we try to engage on and have discourse on matters that influence both public and international policy. I think one of the areas which will be of keen interest for me personally will be the regulation of artificial intelligence, which is something which I am currently trying to draft a policy, because if you look at, if I may just quote the former president of the General Assembly, of the UN General Assembly, he did say that that artificial intelligence is moving faster than our negotiations, which is the digital compact. And so you realize that the question of artificial intelligence is only happening on a global scale, but it's not happening on a local scale. It's not that much integrated. But then it's in the local scale, so it's having much magnitude. Like, for example, on information. These days you have AI can just generate, it can generate a picture of you looking more
a video
handsome,
of us having this conversation.
Of having more conversation. And so,
I don't think we'll do more handsome. We've hit peak with Okize.
That is just one of the areas which I'm looking forward to working with.
Also comes timely since the president has been meeting with some of these tech leaders, like the founder of OpenAI, which is currently the biggest AI platform globally. So it's important that these discussions are reduced to a local scale. As you've said there. Maybe to wrap up here now with Siasa, for people who will be going to Siasa Place, what kind of conversations they can expect, or what you've been putting up there, or what you're writing, and even into the future in your writing journey and in policy advocacy.
Okay, so well, allow me to say something. You've reminded me. I was also want to touch on human rights.
Okay.
Because as you talk about in human rights, 1948 we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The word says universal. But the question is, how universal is it universal? Because, as I'm saying, it was produced by the West. By 48, Kenya was not in existence. And so, the same culture and the same system has developed over time. And currently, and that's why I think when we talked about the issue of LGBTQ, where we're being forced to take up things which we consider as adulterous, okay, which we consider as wrong. And so that aspect in which we see it as Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I believe we should start questioning that aspect. When you say it is universal, how universal it is universal. Yeah, and so that is just one area in which I will want to bring, to look at how is it universal. Right. But then also allow me also to say that on matters governance, we shall also be keen, trying to look how different institutions are working. Okay. Whether they're serving the people, and the economic outlook itself. Okay. Yeah, but then also in the study, there's also a keen study on trying to also, apart from Kenyans understanding what is happening in terms of the policy outlook in the country, also bring regional aspects. Like, for example, the ESC. You know, if you ask how many Kenyans what is happening at the ESC and how it affects them, they really don't know. And there's just too much which Kenyans need to know, and which some can be used for them to tap into business opportunities and just scale up themselves.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. You can be checking out siasaplace.com, and they have a strategic plan here, 2023 to 2027, We the People Inventing the Future. That has been Charles Okech, prolific writer and a dedicated advocate when it comes to matters of international and internal policy. Thank you very much for creating time for us here.
Thank you very much.
Right, when President William Ruto is back in the country, I think we'll get to see whether his international, the journey has translated to anything in policy making.
True.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Taking a short break and then coming back, the newspapers. I have here with me the Standard, the Daily Nation, and the Business Daily. Two very interesting gentlemen, student leaders, who are joining me here on the show, Kusa and Laikipia Students Association. So don't go too far. Wait on for that discussion. Biashara Tuesday. We'll be right back.